All right. Peace and greetings, YouTubers. You know, I swear, they always put the most cuckoo people in charge of everything in this country. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about the Grand Wizard himself, Ron DeSantis. So it's being reported that the Florida governor has decided to block legislation that would have allowed for a new AP course to be taught in Florida high schools. Now, this AP course would have centered on Black history. Before I jump into my full 2 cents, I did want to read a segment of this Huffington Post article, and it states, the organization's website states that the new course, which has been in development for a decade, reaches into a variety of fields: literature, the arts and humanities, political science, geography, and science, to explore the vital contributions and experiences of African Americans. In addition, the College Board said it consulted college professors around the country for input, although the entire curriculum is not publicly available. The course would not be automatically introduced at Florida schools. Like all AP courses, schools must apply with the College Board to offer them. Second part I wanted to share is it's interesting because they already have additional history courses offered in the state of Florida in regards to the AP program, and some of those courses also include AP European History, AP Art History, AP Japanese Language and Culture, AP German Language and Culture, AP Italian Language and Culture, AP Spanish Language and Culture. But for some reason, we got to that good old Black history. They said, oh no, that's too spicy. And what was even more interesting is the administration specifically stated that, you know, an AP course in Black history lacks educational value. And the part to me that's the most crazy is that whiteness in America is so strong that a governor who has no range for a conversation in regards to Black history at all can erase a decade of research and investment in a snap of a finger because he said so. All because of what's going on with his feelings. That's where we're at, right? And so, getting to my point, it's been very interesting. And the other thing about the idea around AP courses is that AP courses are elective courses. These are courses that people can choose to take. Ron DeSantis said, y'all not even going to have a choice as to whether you're going to take it because it's just not even going to be offered. Absolutely not. I said, dang, Grand Wizard. Look, Grand Wizard is playing no games, right? And so people don't even get a choice as to whether or not they want to take the course. And so one other thing I'd also say, because some folks also look at this as, because I saw some people saying, well, dang, you know, this really sucks for a lot of Black students because, you know, they won't get the opportunity to so on and so forth. And one thing I want people to also understand, Black history courses are not specifically just for Black people, because Black history is American history, and you can't have a history or a conversation about the history of America without addressing Black Americans, without looking into the lineage of what it is that Black Americans have contributed voluntarily and involuntarily to the United States. But anyway, getting to my point, it's so interesting because it brings up a question as to why is there such an urge to want to shut down and silence any conversation around Black history, shut down any discourse about the plight of Black Americans. And again, it's not just limited to schools, and it's not just limited to the Grand Wizard, all right? You're seeing this all across the country. You're seeing it with other public figures. You're seeing books being banned and burned. You're seeing librarians face prosecution for carrying certain content in the library. Ruby Bridges is all of a sudden too spicy to teach in some schools. Toni Morrison books are way too out of pocket. You've seen the emergence of like the anti-CRT movement. You're seeing white American parents show up to school board meetings with AR-15s and rifles because they're so stressed about what may possibly be taught at their child's school. You see places like Virginia where the Governor Youngkin decides that there's going to be a hotline and parents can call if they suspect that a teacher is teaching CRT, right? So all of a sudden, the poor kids in 3rd grade are watching My Friend Martin. Remember that video we all used to watch in the 90s? And all of a sudden, somebody's parent felt some kind of way. They can call the hotline. This is where we're at. All right? Interesting. And so one of the things I've been considering and thinking about is like we're really in a space where you're seeing an urge to reset and save a certain narrative, if that makes any sense. And that narrative is the idea of American exceptionalism, the idea that the United States is the greatest place in the world, the idea that the United States is the best of the best of the best scientists, the best mathematicians, athletes, entertainers, you know, the innovation, the creativity. We are the face of everything. Everybody wants to be like the United States. And then the second portion to that is, who has always been presented as the face of American exceptionalism? It's always been white folks, always, specifically white men, but it's always been white folks, right? And so now that we're in a space where people have kind of been trying to challenge the status quo and ask more questions, all of those kind of questions in that discourse chips away at the idea of American exceptionalism. So now you're seeing this effort to kind of save that status quo, save that narrative, protect that idea of American exceptionalism, because again, the celebration of American exceptionalism continues to highlight and put whiteness on a pedestal. And so when that gets challenged, people get frustrated, specifically white Americans and folks who decide to align and see themselves as white, even though they may not be when they check the box, but they think that the idea of having proximity to whiteness will get them further into the door. And so Now you're seeing these movements take place where, it's embedded in the K through 12 curriculums, where people are trying to go and challenge and change what's being taught at the schools. You're seeing it happen in our media where, even some of our news networks have shifted in the way that they present information, right? So there's all these different things taking place, and there is an effort to restore the idea of American exceptionalism through a lens of whiteness. But at the other end of the spectrum, it's interesting because you've seen all these different movements take place, right? As information has shifted and we've come into a space where you have the internet, you have social media, you have people that have decided that, okay, yeah, we learn things in school, we learn things from mainstream media, we learn things from what's presented, but we also want to go and dig ourselves. We want to go and look through the archives. We want to go and dig into the questions of lineage. We want to go and look into all these different things. And so all of this new information, it's not even new information, but it's new to a lot of people, has been emerging. All these different things that have been popping up. And so it's created new movements. It's created, people who have inquiries about why things are the way they are. And when you ask those questions about why things are the way they are in modern times, the only way to get to that answer is you have to go to the origins. And a lot of times the origins tie into history. And so now we've seen movements. We've seen things where people are really fighting for the ideas of restorative justice, because when you look into the origins of what happens with the judicial system, it's rooted in so many layers of anti-blackness. You've seen the conversations and movements around equity, because people now understand that, okay, the reason why so many communities are in the pockets and the positions that they're in, it's not because the people are lazy or because the people aren't smart or the people don't have work ethic. It's because there's an entire system that has went and oppressed these different folks, and some of these systems are still in play, and some of these things are backed by policy, and some of this policy continues to get upgraded and endorsed by the new people who come into power. You're even seeing the conversations and movements around reparations. What's interesting with reparations is reparations has always been a part of the conversation for decades. However, probably in the last 5 years, you've really seen a lot of people really come and really start pushing for this idea, because a lot of people have now been introduced to the information thanks to a lot of different movements and a lot of different figures who have really been putting the information out there. And so you're seeing a conversation of reparations to the point where even when you get to like the 2020 presidential election, reparations was something that was on the debate stage. And so you're seeing all these shifts. And so as people peel back these different layers and try to get questions answered and more things are revealed, you have to just keep pulling, and it's like more layers and layers and layers and layers. In all honesty, it chips away and challenges the idea of American exceptionalism through a lens of whiteness. And in all reality, white people don't look really good when you start tying into history. And then the question becomes, well, exactly how exceptional is the United States if it had to have slavery for 400 plus years? And please note, because folks will come on here and say, oh, well, slavery ended in 1865 and y'all need to move on, and it's all about working hard, and you can get there too if you just believe it, you can achieve it. And you pull yourself up by the bootstrap. And then I guess it was MLK Day the other day, so they'll throw in an MLK quote, the only quote they know, the content of their character. It's going to get you far. And so understand that we're still living in the residuals of slavery today. Understand that American chattel slavery not only created the American economy, but generated and sustained the wealth that will create America's economy, and also play a role into the influence that the United States would have around the world. And also note that slavery, all it did was evolve and change form once it was outlawed. They found other ways to still make money off the backs of black folks, which leads us right into what? Sharecropping. So, how exceptional can the United States be if they had to jump right into sharecropping? Because all of these exceptional landowners were not able to manage their plantations and farms after slavery was outlawed, and they had to find a way to still exploit black folks in order to get their revenue. So pretty much black folks fell into another wave of slavery, and they just called it sharecropping, because these folks are now tied into these different crazy contracts with horrible interest rates and loans where people are pretty much stuck on the plantations that they worked on as sharecroppers. So how exceptional can you be if you had to do sharecropping as far as being a landowner? How exceptional can the United States be if they had to have black codes to find ways to constantly put people into jail because it led into convict leasing? Understand that convict leasing was another element in a way that they were able to pretty much continue to maintain labor of black folks. Find every way possible to arrest folks and lock them up and then make them do a whole bunch of manual labor. And they're still doing that today. Okay, look at your license plates, folks. All right, how exceptional can the United States be if they had to redline every city in the United States? The reason why our country is laid out the way it's laid out is because of redlining. People live in the neighborhoods they live in specifically because of redlining. How exceptional can the United States be if in all reality black folks were left out of the New Deal after the Great Depression on purpose? left out. We were not included in any of that. And understand that something like the New Deal is something that helped to sustain and create what would be America's middle class in the 1950s and 60s. Understand that black folks were also left out of the GI Bill. So even though they went and served the country, they were not included in the GI Bill, which again would play a role into things around the FHA housing loans, into education and access to college, all those different things. Black folks were left out again. So this exceptionalism that I'm seeing, it seems like you're only exceptional when you keep people beneath you through policy. But it gets further, because then again, when we look at, how exceptional can the United States be if they had to bulldoze a lot of black neighborhoods to create freeways that are now still built terribly, and a lot of traffic patterns suck because the freeways were so, they were so pressed to bulldoze certain neighborhoods that a lot of the layouts of these freeways suck. And that's why we have a lot of the gridlock and the issues that we have now, because the freeways weren't even built properly. They just knew that there were certain neighborhoods they wanted to get rid of, and so they decided to do that and created some very terrible layouts in regards to the freeway system. How is it that America is exceptional when in modern times we're still seeing discrimination and discriminatory practices in healthcare, in the job market? Even when it comes to business loans, we're still seeing all of those practices. You know what I mean? Even when we talk about the racial violence that exists in modern times, not just in the past, but even what's happening in modern times. Well, we saw what happened in Charlottesville, and that's so funny because only a handful of years earlier, everyone was breaking their necks to say we're post-racial. We're post-racial. Barack Obama got in there twice. Yeah, we're post-racial. This is one big melting pot. Everybody started quoting the song off Schoolhouse Rocks. Great American melting pot. Remember that? So, they're quoting all of that kind of stuff, right? We're just post-racial, and as soon as the black guy got into office or whatever, you started to see white nationalism kick right into second gear, and you saw what you call the backlash and the wave of whiteness and white aggression. And now look at all the lunatics we have in office right now, right? And so it gets even more crazier than that, because then you get into the questions of, well, how exceptional can the United States be if it has, the highest amount of people incarcerated? And you go into the origins of the prison industrial complex, and then understand that the origins of that tie into when you still had slave catchers and slave patrol. And so you just see layer after layer after layer of all these examples that make you question, well, how exceptional is the country, right? Because then that also ties into the conversation around the judicial system and all the flaws that exist in that, the flaws that exist within our media and the media practices that exist, the flaws that exist in zoning laws, right? This plays a role into where people are going to be able to live, where people can set up shop, where people can create businesses. One of the big setbacks that we saw in the news in regards to the black individuals that were able to receive money from the state of California after they lost their beach land and then they got it back. One of the main challenges they ran into with the zoning laws, they can't even build on it. It has to pretty much stand as is, right? It brings in also conversations about, well, how exceptional can the United States be if we have to have a conversation about the fact that black farmers lost over 90% of their land, mainly because they couldn't qualify to be USDA farms thanks to racist policies that were enacted and are still enacted now, to the point where even when they almost get a settlement, white farmers decide to sue and block the legislation so they still don't get their money, right? This is where we're at. And it gets crazier because then you get into the conversation around heirs land and the racist policy behind the laws around heirs land, right? You get into the conversations around the wealth gap. You get into so many different spaces and so many different conversations about so many flaws that exist within the United States. And even when we talk about unions, understand that the core reasoning behind a lot of workers' unions was not even about the workers' rights. It was more so about the idea of power in numbers behind the idea of whiteness. Because remember, before we got into the space of unions, when we got into those early 1900s, people didn't see themselves technically as white 100% because everybody was still holding on to their earlier nationalities of whatever their parents were when they immigrated here. So yes, I'm Polish, I'm Italian, I'm British, I'm Austrian, I'm German, I'm French. My folks are from Spain, my folks are from Portugal, my folks are from Belgium, my folks are from Denmark, my folks are from Finland, Switzerland, Sweden, like all these different places. And they recognized that you had this entire labor force of black folks that were extremely skilled and talented because, again, coming out of slavery and then coming out of convict leasing and sharecropping, there were only so many jobs available to a lot of black tenants. So black folks were really great when it came to being merchants and engineering and all these different things. And a lot of these different folks who identified as whatever European nationality they wanted to be recognized that they didn't have the power they had within their collective nationality groups. So the Italians couldn't just really shake the table as just being Italians. Germans couldn't do it. But they said, if we get together, Polish, German, French, British, Austrian, Swedish, Dutch, all y'all, we get together and we become white, we have power in number, because now the only group we really have to fight against is that group of black folks. They already don't have any, laws to really back and protect them to begin with, but with the power that we have, we can shake the table. And it's really interesting if you go and you look at the origins of a lot of companies, even places like Ford. fix or repair daily. If you look at places like Ford and you look at what happened to a lot of black employees once these unions formed, and how black folks were either pushed out of companies, or they weren't allowed to climb, or they weren't allowed to have management positions, they weren't allowed to have stock in a company, all kind of laws that were created after the formation of these unions that were supposed to be about workers' rights, but more so it was an idea to protect whiteness and white wealth. So how exceptional can the United States be? And so that's the reason why you see so many people breaking their necks to shut down these conversations, because once you start one conversation, it leads to the next. And so understand, digging into all of that is not a good look for white folks, especially white men. They're not having it. And so what's interesting is a lot of times when you bring these things up, most of the time they don't have the range for the conversation. They don't even know how to refute what you're talking about. Either they're going to jump to the name calling and calling you all kind of N-words, but that doesn't really get you anywhere. So the next thing is they come up with blanket terms and statements to pretty much just dismiss everything. Because if you can get enough people to latch on to the likelihood and the ideas of blanket statements, then all will be well. So this is how we got things like the race card. Now, the term race card was used a whole lot in the 80s and the 90s, early 2000s. I'm not going to pull the race card today. And pretty much anytime black people complained or brought up anything in regards to history or something oppressive, they could always just say, it's the race card. I'm not pulling the race card today. You need to look within yourself, right? That's where we're at. The race card. Look within yourself. So that's where we're at. And like I said, because a lot of folks in white America don't have the range for a conversation on history, and I'm talking about actual history, not the watered down stuff that makes white people look good, but the actual history of what is that plays an origin into why things are the way they are, how people have what they have or don't have what they have. Folks don't have the range for the conversation, and all they can either do is try to dismiss everything by using some kind of blanket statement, or all of a sudden they get mad and, put some more crazy people in office that will go and seam rip all that. So again, you get terms like race card. You get terms like victimhood. That's a great one. They love to throw that one around. There's that victimhood. They got victimhood mentality. I said the whole mentality, not a diagnosing us with stuff, right? And so you can go and you can revisit all the things we just talked about as far as like black folks being left out of the FHA program, or left out of the GI Bill, or left out of the New Deal, or the things going on with zoning laws and heirs land and public domain in the freeways. And you can even highlight the fact that a lot of the oppressions and atrocities that still exist today and are still in power, still backed by law, still backed by covenants, backed by ordinances, backed by legislation, backed by candidates that will maintain and ensure that these things stay in place. In addition to the fact that we're now seeing a seam ripping of gains that were once made in regards to rights and civil rights for a lot of folks. So you saw, the stripping down of the Voting Rights Act. And one of the main justifications behind it was everything's equal now, so we don't need Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. And now look what happened in 2020. Look what happened in 2016. And so, folks will sit there and say victimhood, or they throw out other phrases, CRT. Throw it under the CRT blanket. That's them people just doing what they normally do. That's the CRT crew. Or again, now the new phrase is woke, which is very interesting because woke is a term black folks had been using for years with in-house. That was our stuff. That's why I'm like, sometimes we got to gatekeep better, because folks just be taking our stuff and can't even use it right. How y'all gonna steal a phrase and can't even use it right, and then use it in the wrong context and then create laws with it? The freaking Stop Woke Act. Kind of nonsense. Just stupid. Anyway, and so you have all of these different things that people like to do, all because they're not going to take accountability. Because if you bring up all of those atrocities, especially in the lens of the idea of American exceptionalism, and you ask people, well, how is it that you can be so exceptional, but you did all of these things? There's no way to answer that question without taking accountability, and they're not going to take accountability on that because it makes them look bad. And in addition to that, the idea of being accountable to all of that means that it would also highlight the fact that, hey, maybe folks are not as exceptional as they think they are. They might even be kind of mediocre. And the idea of being mediocre to people that you see yourself as above, for a lot of folks, is an absolute no. So they're going to find every way to fight and claw any kind of conversation around any of this discourse, because nothing is going to break and tear down their fragile ego. Somebody like Ron DeSantis is a grown man with a fragile ego. Any conversation about race or the atrocities that have taken place in America, he takes personally. Even with the Native Americans, you saw he had that whole speech about, folks are going to try and say that the United States was a place that went and stole the land from the Native Americans, and we know that that's not true. So y'all just up here lying. Like, y'all don't even hide it anymore. And the fact that people will get behind it and endorse it just because they want to protect that status quo. They want to protect that ego. They want to feel good. And also understand, conversations about accountability also mean conversations about making things right. And how do you make things right? How do you make it right when there's a wealth gap? How do you make it right when there's generations of residual income that have been given to some but taken away from others? land grabs, all these different things, right? People don't want to go to that conversation because they recognize that's going to be a conversation about reparations. That's going to be a conversation about all kind of other policy. Folks don't want to hear that. And so, yes, they're going to fight you tooth and nail to ensure that you do not have access to any information. And that includes the kids. If you can keep the generations dumb, we don't have to worry about them bringing it up in 30 years. So go ahead and just gut everything and make sure that they're not learning about anything of substance in regards to that origin of history. If they can take it all out of the picture, they don't have to worry about it later on, and we can live our lives in peace without those people constantly bringing up the woke mob content and the CRT stuff and the race card and the victimhood. And the crazy part about all of this is an issue about things that took place from a structural standpoint in regards to structure. However, white America has decided to center themselves in everything like they tend to normally do, and they have made all of this an individual issue. So now, conversations about the origins of the United States in regards to race, you get kickback because folks are saying, oh, well, this is teaching white folks to feel bad about being white. This ain't about you. We're talking origins of history. We're talking about why things are the way they are. We're talking about how do you correct the wrongs that exist. But we can never get to that because folks want to censor their feelings and everything. And if we want to get there, for a lot of white Americans, because now we're in a space where white Americans feel attacked. So I've seen so many articles and pieces and stuff where white men are like, we're just under attack. It's just so hard to be white in this country. Our heritage, I don't know what to do. Every time I say anything to back my heritage, I'm seen as racist, and they just go and they go. And understand, like, for them, their definition of being oppressed is being called out on the oppression that they've given to other people. Being called out on the fact that they've oppressed other groups that are oppressed. That's their definition of being oppressed, right? And so this is not about feelings, However, the laws and the responses are. And so when you see something like a Stop Woke Act, or you see the fact that an entire history course cannot be taught in schools, that's a response from feelings. Not about structure, not about policy, but feelings, because they're worried about how it's going to make white folks feel about their lineage, all right? It's a way for white folks to feel good about their history at the expense of everybody else. That's how it's always been. And so folks are going to fight to protect that narrative. It makes me even think back to like 2012 when Mitt Romney was running for office and his slogan was, "We built it. We built it." I said, y'all just... and the interesting part is that was code. It was coded language, right? We built it. That was kind of the code to say, all right, now these other folks, all these other groups are starting to get too comfortable in here. We need to remind them we built it. We need to remind them whose country this is. That's why we always see these folks who lose their minds when somebody, every now and then there's a white person who gets pissed off about somebody racist and they call out the racist person, and then you see the other white person say, you're the reason we're losing the country. You're the reason America's going downhill, because they get mad at white people who actually do have common sense and understand that, yes, these are the flaws in America. In order for America to become the great country it could be, you have to right the wrongs. You have to address the issues. You can't run from everything. And yes, these conversations are hard to have for some folks and they can't stand to hear it, but it is what it is. And so folks have to understand that how is it that all of a sudden it's too detrimental and too painful for white folks to hear about America's history, but black folks have to be reminded about it each and every day. You know what I mean? And be reminded about the negative aspects of American history because they're living in it. So, understand, this is the nonsense we're up against all the time. This is the nonsense. So, of course, Grand Wizard DeSantis has no problem getting rid of a whole history course that has been in the works for a decade because he said so, because his ego was too fragile. As the status quo continues to be challenged, you're going to see more extreme responses. And we're seeing it with the laws that are being put into play. We're seeing it with the people who are being elected. We're seeing it with just the overall reaction to everything in the United States. You even kind of saw it at one point at the end of the Trump administration where he decided that any federal institution, they would not be in a capacity to start really spending too much time on diversity inclusion or racial sensitivity training. And any institution that really didn't spend time highlighting and celebrating the ideas of the founding fathers, they would lose federal funding. That also included universities that were federally funded. And so you see that it's more than just feelings. It comes into policy. It comes into law. It comes into a way to submit things to stay the way they are because people are going to fight and claw to maintain the status quo that they would like to have. And so, again, like I've said, for a lot of people in white America, because they have gotten the luxury to operate as the standard for their entire existence, they've gotten the luxury to operate as the status quo and also have that status quo benefit them. They don't have to challenge themselves to evolve with anything. They don't have to challenge themselves to learn anything more than what they want to learn because the world, it's their world and we're all living in it, according to them. And so that's why you're seeing such an extreme response to something as simple as a Black History course being taught. They didn't even, understand a Black History course is not going to be all doom and gloom. They're going to still be all these elements about all these great contributions, but they're like, we can't even run the risk of folks learning too much, so just get rid of the whole thing. right? And so I want to shift gears here because understand that history correlates with everything. And some folks are like, why are you so gung-ho about history? Who cares? But understand that everything ties together. And a lot of times history repeats itself. And I talked about this before on my Kanye West video where I highlighted what was happening with the Liberty City riots in 1980. But what's really interesting with that, so back in 1980, they had a situation where a black man was killed by the police, right? So he gets stopped, and at some point they done beat this man down so bad they done beat him in the head with his motorcycle helmet and threw the helmet across the fence and all this other stuff. And so he ends up dying as a result of his injuries. Of course, the police get off, and then the police chief, he goes and does the media blitz campaign about how this was stupid and y'all did too much and y'all overreacted. And so it stirs up the reaction. So then comes the riots and everything else. Mind you, in that video, I did an entire dissection about that entire region and the origins and the context of what led up to even the moment with the police. So if you want to get that full backstory, check out whatever the last video is that I did of Kanye West a few months ago. Anyway, with that being said, so here, in come the riots, in come the trash cans and everything getting kicked down. At the same time, the group, the Temptations, right? The Temptations, this great Motown group, they've been really popular in the 60s and the first half of the 70s. Second half of the 70s, things slow down a bit, right? They haven't really had a really big hit since about 75, 76. They come out with a song called Power, right? And so Power is this really great song. You got Dennis Edwards on the lead. Dennis is tearing that song up, right? And so it becomes a fast-growing hit. It's really, really popular. It finds its way close to the top 40 on the Billboard Hot 100. It's a top 10 on the R&B charts, and it's making its gains. It was about to be a song that was really going to help the Temptations really revive their career and revive their image and everything else, and their standing within the music industry. And then the song pretty much got yanked from radio. Why did it get yanked from radio? Well, because of the context and the content of the song. The song was all about empowerment and black people collectively understanding that together we have power in number, and understanding that, yes, the United States has its flaws, and so these are the flaws that exist, but this is what we can do to change it. And if we stick together and work as a community, we can change the system and all that kind of stuff. And that was seen as fertilizer for the riots over in Liberty City. And so radio programmers in Florida started yanking the song, and then it moved its way up. And so you go up Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, to the Carolinas, it's starting to get yanked off radio and everything like that, because people are also afraid that because this song has legs and it is kind of stirring a national conversation in regards to the fact that the Liberty City riots are now also getting national traction, people were afraid that there would be similar responses in other cities, because what happened in Liberty City in regards to that man being killed by the police, that wasn't the only situation at that time. There were all kind of instances of the same thing happening in all the other cities across the country. And so there was a fear that, hey, this song just might be too spicy, so we need to yank it. And so the song pretty much gets yanked and stalls at somewhere near the top 40 on the Billboard Hot 100. But that's literally how things have always correlated and tied. Like, people will always fight and claw when they think that people are going to get too enlightened. And so that status quo always comes right back down to try to keep things into place. It's even like when you look at the Daughters of the Confederacy and how they were able to influence the conversations or the national collective thought around the Confederacy, right? And so you have the Civil War in, and there's all this resentment, and the country is still really divided. It wasn't like the Civil War ended and everybody was friends. Oh no, now the federal government had to set up shop in the southern states, and there's all this stuff happening. And long story short, you have the daughters of these soldiers who feel some kind of way. They want the imaging of their fathers and grandfathers to be great, and so they go and they start these national campaigns to reshape and change the narrative, just like I said at the beginning of this video, that the urgency to shift and refresh the narrative around the Confederacy. That's what led into us having all the Confederate statues all across the country, even in states that aren't even Confederate states. It's interesting when you go to a place like Oregon and you see like a family whose entire lineage is rooted in Oregon. They don't even have any ties to any southern states, and they got Confederate flags everywhere. My heritage. Okay. All right. But anyway, so that led into the statues being created. That also led into the leverage that they had politically, where they were able to get a lot of candidates in office. Those candidates were able to inspire and influence a lot of things that would take place in school boards, which led into what would happen with our curriculums, where now we're in a space where, depending on what state you're in, a history lesson can be taught in so many different ways depending on what state you're in, because again, they even carried influence into how books would be sold into our K through 12 institutions, because that's how much influence they had. And so understand, people are going to fight and claw to protect the narrative or the status quo of how they want to see themselves. And so we're seeing it. So that's why even in modern times, you have Americans who have no ties to the Confederacy who fight hard for it. And that's why anytime there's a conversation of rebelling, whatever, especially when it's white folks that want to go and I guess they think we're under a tyranny, they pull out the Confederate flag. They go to the January 6th, they got Confederate flags out there. Just all over the place. Just anything goes. And so I want to close on this just because I've been talking for too long. But again, understand that when we talk about history, everything works full cycle. Everything has a reason for happening. And so I want to close and talk about Ocoee, Florida. So Ocoee was a town around Orange County, Florida. And when we backtrack to about 1920, it was a town that was doing really well economically because it was right by a major railroad hub. And so that was really great for trade and business. And so you had a lot of very successful people in the area, especially black folks. And so there was a black guy named Mose Norman, and there was also a black guy named July Perry. Now, July Perry was a black labor broker. So pretty much what he would do is he was kind of like a contractor, or like he had like a contracting business where he could provide laborers and workers for different companies and everything like that. So times were really, really great in the area. And so it's 1920, which means it's also an election year, right? It's time to bring in a new president and some new folks in Congress and everything like that. There's a judge named John Chaney who is running for Senate. And John Chaney actually has somewhat of an okay relationship with the black residents of the area. Now, this was a white guy, so he has an okay, rapport with black folks in the area. And so the thing about voting in 1920 is a lot of black folks are kind of scared to still vote because there's still the idea of voter intimidation. The Klan is heavily present in the area. The Klan would often do different marches in the area, or they go to Jacksonville. They go to all these different places where there were prominent black populations and do these marches every time it was close to election season because they wanted to intimidate and scare people into not voting. Or you had poll watchers, which we still have in modern times now all of a sudden, and there was also the poll tax. And so John Chaney decided, well, I have to find a way to get these people to, these are going to be people that bring me over the edge. I need their support. So he was trying to find a way to get black voters to show up. And so that's when he started to call on people like Mose Norman and July Perry to help get voters registered. So, they start these drives and get black folks to register. And they were even paying people's poll taxes just so that they could register and everything like that. So when it's election day, Mose Norman is at the polling station. There's some kind of mishap that takes place between him and some of the folks at the polling station, specifically some white folks. So it causes a bunch of backlash. Mose Norman gave July Perry a heads up like, hey, just so you know, if you get down here, they kind of tripping at this polling station. So you really keep your guard up because, they out here with weapons and everything else. Folks were so mad about the mishap that took place at the polling station, they decided they just wanted to go fight everybody. So a white mob showed up to July Perry's house. Now, this mob was actually the Klan, right? Like I said, the Klan had been marching all around town for weeks. They've been going and trying to, push their weight around. And so they show up at July Perry's house. July Perry was like, bring the smoke. And so there's some kind of scuffle. 2 Klan members get killed, right? Done, right? Oh no, you ain't about to kill the white folks in this part of Florida. So the mob gets bigger, and the mob is so enraged, they go and get more folks, and then they go and start burning down all of the black side of town and killing up a bunch of black folks. They kill anywhere between 30 and 60 black folks. And in addition to that, July Perry is still alive. Now, they done stumped him out and beat this man bad. He is down bad. They tie him to a truck, drive him to Judge Chaney's house. They drag him, like tie him to a rope and drive the car, and he's being dragged through the street. He's still alive at this point. And then they literally lynch him in front of the judge's house as a reminder to let him know, like, okay, play on the wrong side, play on the wrong team if you want to. And while the lynching is going on, they're still burning down the black side of town. And so unfortunately, you have 30 to 60 black folks die, and in reality, the entire black collective of that town leaves. They move away. There was 300 black families there. All of them got up out of there because they're like, this place is crazy. And they were willing to let the economy of that town crash, all in the name of their violence. So yes, the economy of Ocoee started to pretty much fall down because now you don't have the laborers. And Ocoee ended up becoming a sundown town. If we know about sundown towns, those are pretty much towns where if you were black, don't be there after the sun goes down, or, anything goes. And so going back to my conversation about how narratives can change, remember how I said Ocoee is in Orange County, Florida. When you think of Orange County, Florida, what do you think of? Orlando. When you think of Orlando, what do you think of, right? There's Disney, the happiest place on earth. There's SeaWorld. I mean, if you're an animal rights person, you probably ain't really dealing with SeaWorld. But, if you're a kid, SeaWorld, there's Shamu and the orcas, and there's Universal Studios, E.T. Phone Home. And if you're a kid from the 90s, there's Nickelodeon Studios. All the good shows are taped there. Double Dare and Guts. Do, you have it. So it's interesting to see how narratives can shift and change so much. So an area like Orange County that has that element of history, and that was just one race massacre that took place in Florida. We've talked about Rosewood before, but understand, a place like Florida where you've had all of these instances take place, look at how easy it is to brush over the reality of what is about a specific area and paint it over with something whimsical like Disney World. Like, that's how history operates in the United States, where, again, they're always going to find ways to brush over things or hide different stories or keep narratives under wraps because they don't want people asking questions. Anyway, like I've said before, as a parent, I hope your children are not only learning in the classroom. Like, I hope there are additional outlets for education that your children are getting, whether it be at home, whether you're just giving them like documentaries, new books, and anything, just because I don't think it's solely on the schools to educate children, but also understand that now we're in a space where even K through 12 education is questionable based on who's in power, based on who's on the school board, based on what gets voted in. And so it's so easy to influence or corrupt or seam rip or kill the consciousness or even the collective thought of an entire generation if you can attack the education system. And that's pretty much what's happening right now. Anyway, I'm out. Share your 2 cents. If you didn't like what I said, I'm out. Subscribe. It's all laid out.